So I am the product of the Christian Reformed Church in Western Michigan, Westside Christian, Grand Rapids Christian High, Calvin College. And a week ago, I made these comments at Calvin, essentially reflecting on what I was thinking when I wrote that book and how I've rethought it and how my thinking has changed. 50 years ago this spring, I graduated from Calvin and headed for UCLA Film School. The 60s came in like a howling wind and carried me off. I transferred my interest in theological matters into a love of the cinema, specifically the European cinema of the 60s. I had a lot of catching up to do. The Christian Reformed Church's position on film attendance was restrictive when I was raised, and I hadn't seen many films. In Los Angeles, I became a movie buff and a film critic. I saw movies constantly. But I remained curious. Was there a connection between the world I was living in and the world I had come from? In certain films, I sensed a link between the past and the present, a link between a sacred past and a profane present, between the life of the soul and the commercial life of cinema. But it was a link of style, not content. This was the insight I had and the insight others have had before me. Spirituality in art is about the how and not the what. The form reveals the content. Content is crucial, of course, but it is defined by form. So at the age of 24, I wrote Transcendental Style in film. I realized I was too young to write it at the time, but I also realized that if I didn't write it then, I never would. So I didn't see anyone else writing it, so I took the plunge. The Transcendental Style I proposed in that book was informed by the films of Ozu and Bresson and Dreyer. Their films use similar techniques to draw the viewer into contact with the ineffable, the invisible, the holy other. These techniques were, to varying degrees, withholding techniques. They hold elements away from the viewer, elements the viewer expects. The viewer gets less. The essence of motion pictures is action and empathy. Photographs create empathy. We see images of objects or persons, and we relate to those images. And then the photographs move. Empathy and action. These are the two great commercial engines of commercial motion pictures. In the place of action, Transcendental Style offers delayed action, or sometimes inaction. Characters speak slowly, walk slowly. There are pauses. There are lengthy tableaus where nothing seems to happen. Excessively long camera takes. Take the delayed cut, for example. Normally a cut is made just before or after an action. Character enters a room, cut as the door opens. Character leaves the room, cut as the door closes. The delayed cut creates dead time. Character leaves the room, door closes, count 1, 2, 3, and then cut. That's not how your eye works. Your eye doesn't sit there and watch a closed door after someone leaves. This type of style also retards empathy. Transcendental Style uses flat expressions, emotionless performances, often by non-actors. In conventional films, dramas are edited to enhance empathy. See the dog, see the boy watching the dog, back to the dog, back to the boy. In contrast, Transcendental Style has longer takes and fewer cuts. Sometimes scenes are played in a single master angle. No editorial winks or nudges. The viewer is not being instructed by edits. You aren't being told which character or line of dialogue is more important at this moment. The viewer's eye and interest must make its own choice as he pans across the screen to see which character he wants to concentrate at this moment. The same is true with music. Underscoring is the simplest, most effective way to dictate emotion. It tells you how to feel: happy, scared, sad, and so forth. In Transcendental Style, there is often no musical underscoring, only sound effects, no musical guideposts, or music is used unexpectedly, such as in Ozu, where you get a romantic burst of Western music over the shot of a vase or a mountain. So why would filmmakers work against the qualities that make movies unique and successful? Because such filmmakers have a different agenda. They do not seek solely to entertain, divert, and amuse. They want to draw viewers closer to the non-material world, into the mystery. To do this, Transcendental Style must take a lean-back approach. Most films lean into the viewer, desperate for the viewer's attention. They grab us by the lapels. They hold us tight. They show us pictures of beautiful people and exciting action. And all the while, they play music, 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 so we know how to feel every single moment. Contemplative films, on the other hand, lean away. They challenge the viewer to lean forward, to become part of the film's journey, to become active rather than passive. Transcendental Style does not rely on simply intellectual or emotional techniques. You can't think your way into the world of the soul. Emotions, those imposed on you by the filmmaker, aren't going to get you there either. Spiritual style in art is closer to meditation, to find that quiet place where the holy resides. Good things happen while you wait. So Transcendental Style, then, is a process. It's a liturgy. It's a way. It is a towel. An artist cannot bring a viewer into the presence of the mystery by catering to the viewer's desire for movement. It doesn't work that way. There is no such thing as fast meditation, and there is no such thing as fast Transcendental Style. When a film leans away from a viewer, the viewer can do one of two things. He or she could lean forward into the film, or they can leave the theater. Is it possible for a film to lean back too much? Of course, and many have done so. At what point does boredom cease to be a precise aesthetic tool and become just plain old boredom? Well, that's the delicate dance of spiritual style. I'd like to digress a moment and say a word about faith-based films. They've been a lot in the news lately, but they should not be confused with Transcendental Style. I don't see much difference between faith-based films and commercial cinema. Faith-based films use the same tools, the same manipulation of action and empathy as routine Hollywood melodramas. These are the techniques that make one fall in love with Reese Witherspoon or be stirred by Tom Cruise, or hate the villain, or actually love the villain. Whether or not the goal of the film is to say Hitler is evil or to say Hitler is great doesn't really affect the technique much. It's all the same techniques, the same formula. So these faith-based films are simply Hollywood tricks in God's name. And for me, inserting Jesus into a commercial formula is not the same as making a spiritual film. So I wrote that book. UCal published it. Excuse me. And my life took another direction. I became involved in screenwriting and directing. I liked spiritual films. I had written about them, but had no interest in making one myself. I was too intoxicated by action and empathy. Occasionally, someone would attempt to connect my films with the Transcendental Style I had written about, and I would say, no, that's not me. You'll never catch me skating on that thin Braconian ice. 3 years ago, I was invited to observe a panel at SCMS, Society for Cinema and Media Studies, their yearly convention in Atlanta. And the panel was entitled Rethinking Transcendental Style. 3 film scholars from Baylor, from Israel, from Portugal, gave reappraisals of my 45-year-old book. And I thought to myself, if anyone is rethinking transcendental style, it should be me. So I started rethinking. The result was an essay, which will be included in the updated version of Transcendental Style and Film to be published in May. So what did happen to Transcendental Style? Where did my rethinking take me? Well, 3 things happened. First, Gilles Deleuze happened. Then Andrei Tarkovsky happened. And then slow cinema happened. What I did not realize in 1972, that what I was calling Transcendental Style was actually an outgrowth of post-war neorealism. This was the insight that French philosopher Gilles Deleuze brought with his 2 cinema books, Movement Image in 1984 and Time Image in 1986. Deleuze divided film history into 2 periods. Movement image was defined how objects moved on screen, and time image was defined by the time the object was observed. For Deleuze, World War II was the dividing line. After the war, with the rise of Italian neorealism, Deleuze detected a shift away from the importance of movement and toward the importance of time. Now, I'm not that well versed in Deleuze, and he is, in fact, a very difficult man to read. And I may be over my head, but it's hard to deny that beginning in the late 1940s, certain narrative films began to slow down, slow their pace, and linger over their images. Both Andre Bazin and Deleuze point to the same shot in Vittorio's 1952, De Sica's 1952 Umberto D as the beginning of this change. In that film, a maid, a minor character, rises from bed and goes to light the kitchen stove. She takes a stick match out and strikes it against the wall. It fails to light. She strikes it again. This time it lights. She holds it to the stove, turns on the gas, and it goes out. Turns off the gas, puts the match down, grabs another match, strikes it against the wall again. It lights. This time, the stove lights. De Sica has shifted the center of gravity of this scene. This scene is not so much about striking a match. It is about the time spent watching a person striking a match. And that's that vital difference that he detected. Robert Bresson was one of the first directors to realize that this unnecessary protraction of time, holding on to an image longer than the viewer expects, had a phenomenological effect. The viewer becomes aware of watching something over time. This is what philosopher Henri Bergson had called la durée, the duration of an experience. Duration changes the relationship between the seer and the seen. Let's go back to the delayed cut. Bresson's character in Pickpocket, say, exits the room and Bresson holds on the door for 3 seconds. What is happening during those 3 seconds? It's not nothing. Something is happening. But it's not about that door. It's about you watching that door for 3 seconds. What if he holds onto the door for 10 seconds? Then what is happening? What if he holds on for 20 seconds? What's happening? Duration was happening. Bresson, Ozu, Rossellini used this type of duration to create meditative cinema. Mizoguchi and Antonioni used it to create contemplative cinema. Let me give a hypothetical example of how duration works. An exaggerated one, but let's imagine a pastoral scene. A grassy hill, clouds in the distance, a far-off road. a small herd of goats, all in a locked-off frame. A man appears in the upper right-hand corner and starts slowly walking down the diagonal path which crosses the frame. If you've seen any slow films, you know that the director is not going to cut until that man walks all the way through the frame and then exits. And then he may even not cut, then he may wait a while. So your mind begins to wander. You look at the goats, there's 5 of them. You listen to the wind in the trees, it's really quite loud. You watch the shape of the clouds, and then you hear the sound of children and the sound of a bus. There must be a school bus coming. Which side of the screen will it enter from? Is it coming from the right or the left? The sound of the bus fades away. I guess it's not coming. Oh, there's only 4 goats now. One of them must have left while I was trying to figure out where the bus was coming from. Now the man is almost halfway across the screen, but the sky seems darker. Is there a storm coming? And what is that sound? Is that the school bus coming back? Well, what's going on here? You, the viewer, are watching a movie, but you're also creating one. Your own movie about children in a school bus and goats and an impending storm. You have become an active viewer. You are now leaning forward. You are leaning into the film, becoming part of the creative process of the film. At the time Deleuze was formulating his theory of time image, duration, Russian director Andrei Tarkovsky was putting it into practice. Influenced by Bresson, Tarkovsky brought withholding devices to the large canvas, encompassing science fiction, dreams, memory, history, metaphysics, and poetic realism. Ozu's theme was the family, Bresson's was the individual, but Tarkovsky's was time itself. I don't think, although Tarkovsky used elements of Transcendental Style, he was not a purist. He had religious themes, religious obsessions, religious characters. He was austere. He used distancing devices, but his intent was slightly different. A transcendental guide or girl or film director for that matter self-effacingly seeks to escort his respondent to another level of consciousness. Tarkovsky was more interested in passing through the portal himself than escorting the viewer. This seemed clear to me at the end of his 1984 film Nostalgia. At the end of that film, Dominic, a deranged mystic, immolates himself, sets himself afire. In response, Andre, the film's protagonist and Tarkovsky's surrogate, fulfills his promise to Dominic to carry a lit candle across the waters of a mineral pool. The pool is empty when it is raining and windy, and Andre is sick, and he struggles till the candle goes out. The candle lights again. He has to light the candle again, just like the little maid. And he eventually makes it across the pool, step by step, foot by foot, and places the candle on the ledge, at which point he steps out of frame, falls off frame, and dies. The camera remains fixed on that shot of the candle. That is the Bressonian ending. That's the final shot of Diary of a Country Priest. You know, the crucifix on the wall is the final shot, Trial of Joan of Arc, which is the shot of the smoldering stake. But it's not the last shot of Nostalgia. Tarkovsky then switches to black and white and pictures Andre, his dog, seated outside of his family home by a pool of water, and slowly starts pulling back. And he keeps pulling back, revealing that this whole tableau of the family home, it is all inside of the ruins of a large stone cathedral. The subject of the film is not the icon, it's not the candle, it's memory, Tarkovsky's memory. Tarkovsky's film marked a dividing point in the history of durational cinema. Before Tarkovsky, the use of withholding and distancing devices, what Deleuze called time image, took place in the context of commercial theatrical cinema. Transcendental Style falls into this category. After Tarkovsky, these devices increasingly became exaggerated, and the films fell into the domain of film festivals and art museums. The 3-second Bresson shot of a door became a 10-minute static view of traffic. Transcendental Style had morphed into the hydra-headed monster we call slow cinema. Without going into length, I'll just say that slow cinema refers to films of considerable length where very little happens. Bellatar's Satan Tango runs over 7 hours. The opening shot, which is a static shot of cows wandering in a courtyard, lasts 7.5 minutes. This is why I say it's outside the purview of commercial cinema. Cinema, in my opinion, is inherently narrative. When a photographed image occurs over time, that's narrative. When two moving images are conjoined, that's narrative. Film narrative has become more and more complex over the decades. More cuts, faster cuts, so forth. But what happens when it becomes less complex? What happens when it dissembles? What happens when movement image becomes time image? When action becomes duration? These are the questions raised by slow cinema. It seems to me as movies move away from their narrative essence, their narrative nucleus, they vector in one of 3 directions, and all 3 are dead-end points. One is the surveillance camera, another is the art gallery, and the third is the mandala. Take, for example, the surveillance camera endpoint. In 1952, the maid in Umberto D struck her match 3 times. In 1975, the title character of Chantal Akerman's Jean Dielman spent a 30-minute stretch doing simple household tasks. By 2009, that maid and Dielman had morphed into the family members of Jean-Louis Oxide II, who prepare and eat dumplings over the course of her 132-minute 9-shot film. The quotidien, the desire to emphasize the daily, was reaching a dead end. The next stop would simply be the surveillance camera, the unending view of reality. A tendency would have reached its conceptual endpoint. The art gallery tendency, which is the tendency toward light and sound, its dead point becomes a James Turrell installation in a gallery. And the spiritual tendency toward meditation ends up just with a fixed image, which is, say, a mandala, and that's all. What defines these vectors is their origin in narrative movement image and their endpoint in conceptual essence, and the fact that they all, at some point, must pass through the Tarkovsky ring, the celestial marker which separates commercial cinema from museum cinema. So in closing, I return to the question which I began. What happened to Transcendental Style? It's still there. Transcendental Style is still being used. Transcendental Style, of course, is within the Tarkovsky ring. The style is designed for audiences, not academics, smaller audiences, but audiences nonetheless. These films may use duration, they may employ boredom, but they employ it in service of a popular audience. In recent years, I would describe Alexander Sakharov's Mother and Son, Carlos Regado's Silent Light, Bruno Dumont's Hedwig, Jessica Hauser's Lords, Paweł Pawlowski's Ida, Derek Brueggemann's Stations of the Cross, and Eugene Green's Sapienza as films which employ the Transcendental Style. So that's one of the things I've been thinking about the last 50 years.